The Caldwell farm dispersal ran into the afternoon of the last Friday in October, and by the time the auctioneer reached the poultry lot, the temperature outside had dropped enough that the buyers who remained were stamping their feet and thinking about the drive home. The lot was 117 hens. The notation in the sale bill was economical in its discouragement. Laying flock, mixed heritage breeds, reduced body condition, production history inconsistent, offered as lot only. What the notation described, in the specific vocabulary of a sale document trying to be accurate without being any more damaging than accuracy required, was a flock that had been through 2 hard seasons under a management situation that had not served them. The Caldwell operation had been in decline for 3 years, the feed quality falling as the finances tightened, the husbandry attention reducing as the operation consumed more of its own resources than it was producing. The hens showed it. They were small, smaller than their breeds warranted, the mixed heritage flock that Gerald Caldwell had assembled over a decade from the breeds best suited to northern laying conditions, and that had once been a reliable operation, now carrying the specific look of birds that have been under-resourced long enough for the under-resourcing to have become structural. Dull feathering, light frame. The particular stillness of animals that have learned to conserve what little they have rather than express what they are capable of. Every experienced poultry buyer at the Caldwell sale looked at the lot and made the same calculation. A hen in reduced body condition does not lay through winter. Winter laying in the northern settlements was already difficult, the shortened daylight, the energy diversion required for heat maintenance, the feed costs that a winter laying operation required to sustain production. A hen in good condition managed winter laying with difficulty. A hen in the condition of the Caldwell flock did not manage it at all. That was the calculation. Rosalind Fenne was not making that calculation. She was 47 years old, a woman who had kept poultry for 22 years and who had learned, across those 22 years, to make a distinction that most poultry buyers did not make because most poultry buyers had not had occasion to need it. The distinction was between a hen that was constitutionally weak, a bird whose genetics or health history had placed a ceiling on what it could produce regardless of management, and a hen that was conditionally weak, a bird whose underlying capacity was sound and whose current condition was the product of circumstances that could be changed. The Caldwell hens were conditionally weak. She knew this the way a woman knows something she cannot yet prove, because the breeds were right. Gerald Caldwell had assembled his flock from the cold-hardy heritage varieties that the northern settlements had proven over 2 generations of selection, the heavy-feathered breeds that maintained body temperature efficiently in northern winters, the dual-purpose varieties whose metabolic efficiency allowed them to sustain production on less feed than the commercial breeds required. The genetics were sound. What had been done to those genetics by 3 years of inadequate management was not permanent. It was reversible. At the right feed quality, over sufficient time, the body condition of a constitutionally sound hen restores itself, and a hen whose body condition has been restored produces with the full expression of the genetics it has always carried. She needed 8 weeks. She raised her hand and bought all 117 hens for $12.40. The men remaining at the sale said what men say. She arranged for the birds to be crated and transported to her holding that afternoon and drove home in the first serious snow of the season, with 117 hens in the wagon bed, and the specific composure of a woman who has made a decision she can defend and has no requirement that anyone else understand it before the evidence is available. What she lacked was the winter. It was already arriving. She spent the first week on the coop. Not on the birds yet, on the coop, because the coop was the foundation, and the foundation had to be correct before the management on top of it would produce what she needed it to produce. Her existing structure held 40 birds comfortably. 117 birds required expansion, and the expansion required more than additional space. It required the specific thermal management that winter laying demanded, and that most poultry operations in the northern settlements did not provide at the level the science of the thing actually required. She had been reading the agricultural journal she subscribed to from the Eastern universities had been publishing, across the previous 3 years, a series of letters from poultry researchers describing the relationship between coop temperature, feed energy allocation, and winter laying rates. The relationship was not complicated in principle. A hen that was spending her metabolic energy maintaining body temperature in a cold coop had less energy available for egg production, and a hen with less energy available for egg production produced fewer eggs, and a hen in reduced body conditions spending energy on warmth in an inadequately insulated coop produced, in a hard winter, no eggs at all. The solution the research described was not heat. Active heating of a poultry coop in a northern winter was a fire risk and a cost that the economics of egg production did not support. The solution was insulation, reducing the rate at which the coop lost the heat the birds themselves produced, so that the body heat of the flock maintained the interior temperature at a level that freed the birds' individual metabolic energy for production rather than survival. She added a second wall to the north face of the coop, packing the cavity with the dried cattail fluff she had harvested from the marsh at the end of her east pasture in September. Harvested, not because she had known then that she would buy the Caldwell flock in October, but because she had known for 3 years that she was going to expand her laying operation and had been preparing for that expansion in the way that she prepared for most things, ahead of the specific moment when the preparation would be needed. She banked the exterior walls with the straw she had baled from the last cutting. She hung the heavy canvas across the interior of the north-facing door so that the birds could pass through, but the cold air could not follow them in with the directness it would otherwise achieve. Then she turned to the feed. The standard northern settlement laying hen winter feed was whole corn supplemented with whatever grain the operation could afford. Corn provided energy. It did not provide, in the quantities a winter-laying hen required, the specific protein and mineral profile that egg production demanded: the calcium for shell formation, the protein for albumin production, the trace minerals that the research letters described as the overlooked variable in winter-laying performance. She sourced dried fish meal from the trading post in town, available, not expensive, consistently overlooked as a poultry feed supplement because it was associated with coastal rather than inland operations, and because the smell of it discouraged the handling that its use required. She mixed it into the grain at the ratio the research described. She added the crushed oyster shell she had been buying for 2 years for the calcium supplementation that her existing flock had benefited from. She added the dried greens, kale, dried and stored from the summer garden, that provided the light-spectrum stimulation that the research suggested helped maintain the hormonal cycling that controlled laying. She fed this mixture twice daily, in the morning and at the afternoon hour she had determined through 3 years of observation was the feeding time that produced the most settled and productive behavior in her existing flock. She watched the Caldwell birds. She had not yet told anyone what she was watching for. But she was watching. The first signs arrived in the 3rd week of November. Not production, not yet. The first signs were physical, the feathering beginning to recover its density as the improved nutrition redirected the birds' resources toward the maintenance systems that inadequate feed had been starving. The combs brightening from the pale, cool color of under-resourced birds to the warmer tone that indicates adequate circulation and metabolic activity. The weight increasing, slowly, measurably, in the handfeel of a woman who had been picking up hens for 22 years and knew what a hen of each breed should weigh, and could track the recovery toward that weight without a scale. She kept a ledger. Not individual weights, 117 individual weight records were not practically manageable, but a representative sample of 12 birds, 3 from each of the 4 primary breed groups in the Caldwell flock, weighed on the hand scale each Monday morning and recorded against the previous week's figure. The trend in the third week of November was unmistakable to anyone who knew what they were looking at. The trend was upward. The first egg appeared on the 23rd of November. 1 egg, from 1 hen. In the nest box she had positioned in the corner of the insulated section that her temperature monitoring, a thermometer mounted at the mid-height of the coop's interior, checked morning and evening, and recorded beside the weight figures, consistently showed to be the warmest area in the structure. She noted it in the ledger with the specific restraint of a person, recording a data point, rather than celebrating a result. By the first week of December, 11 hens were laying. By the second week, 29. By the third week of December, as the winter that the northern settlements would remember for years was building its final intentions in the clouds above the valley, 61 of the 117 hens were producing. One of the 11 eggs daily, on the coldest morning in December, from a flock that the men at the Caldwell sale had assessed as too weak to lay. A neighbor named Bertram Cole, who ran the largest poultry operation in the county, 400 birds, the commercial variety, managed in the conventional way of the settlement's most established operations, rode past Rosalind's holding on a Thursday morning in the third week of December, and stopped at the fence line for the specific reason that a man stops at a fence line when he sees something that does not match his existing understanding of the situation. He saw the crate beside the coop door. Not empty. Full, the morning collection, 61 eggs, more than his 400 birds had produced that morning combined, from a flock that he had watched being loaded into a wagon at the Caldwell sale 6 weeks before, and had assessed as a charitable purchase at best. He asked how many birds she had. She told him. He looked at the crate. He asked what she was feeding them. She told him that too, all of it, the fish meal, the oyster shell, the dried greens, the insulation research, the temperature management, the twice-daily feeding at the times that experience had shown produced the best behavior, and the research had suggested produced the most consistent hormonal cycling. She told him because he was a neighbor, and because the knowledge did not diminish by being shared, and because a county whose poultry operations were producing more eggs through the hard months of winter was a better county than one whose operations were not. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said he had not thought the Caldwell birds had it in them. She said most things have more in them than the circumstances they are found in suggest. Word was still moving before he reached the end of the road. She could feel it the way a person feels weather before the clouds arrive. January arrived with the specific intention the autumn sky had been suggesting since November. The temperature in the Fenwick County Valley dropped to levels that the old-timers discussed in the vocabulary reserved for events that establish new reference points. Not the worst cold they had felt, some of them said, but the most sustained, the most committed, the kind that did not relent between storms but maintained its position and added to it, so that by the second week of January the county's farming families were not managing a cold snap but a sustained siege. The poultry operations were the first to show the cost. Production in a northern laying flock drops with temperature. This was understood and expected, and had always been managed by the settlement's egg buyers through the simple mechanism of expecting less and paying more in January than in July. What the January of that year produced was not the ordinary seasonal reduction. It was a collapse. The commercial flocks, managed in the conventional way in structures that were adequate to normal winters and inadequate to this one, dropping to a fraction of their autumn production as the birds diverted their energy from laying to survival in coops that the cold was winning against. Bertram Cole's 400 birds produced 19 eggs on the 14th of January. Rosalind Fenne's 117 produced 83. The coop temperature on the 14th of January, recorded at the mid-height thermometer at the morning check, was 41 degrees. The outside temperature was 6 below zero. 35 degrees of differential, maintained by the body heat of 117 hens in a well-insulated structure, supplemented by no active heating. Costing nothing beyond the insulation work she had done in October, and the feed program that the fish meal and oyster shell and dried greens represented. She ran the ledger numbers on the 14th evening. The numbers told a story she had not fully anticipated when she raised her hand at the Caldwell sale in October. Not because the science had not predicted it, because the science had predicted it with reasonable accuracy, but because the gap between prediction and reality is where the satisfaction lives, and the satisfaction in this case was larger than she had expected. The trading post in town had been fielding requests for eggs since the second week of January from the families and the businesses whose normal supply arrangements had been disrupted by the production collapse across the county. The requests were specific and urgent in the way that requests become when the disruption is sustained and the alternative is not available. The trading post owner, a practical woman named Doris Hecht, who had been running the operation for 14 years, and who understood supply situations with the clarity of a person whose livelihood depends on that understanding, drove to Rosalind's holding on the 17th of January. She asked what Rosalind had available. Rosalind told her, consistent daily production, currently running at approximately 70 to 80 eggs per day depending on conditions, available for supply at a price she had calculated on the basis of her costs and the value of what the January situation made the eggs worth. Not the exploitative calculation of a shortage, but the honest calculation of production that required specific investment and was now demonstrating its value. Doris Hecht accepted the price without negotiation. She asked if Rosalind could increase production. Rosalind said she could source additional birds from the breed lines the Caldwell flock represented, if the right animals were available, and if the feed program could be maintained at scale. She said she would need the spring to do it correctly. Doris said she would wait for the spring. The waiting list for the following autumn's egg supply was 8 accounts by the end of January, 14 by February. What she lacked was more hens and more months. What she had was a coop full of birds, proving a point that the county had not known needed proving, a ledger that was saying something it had not been saying in October, and the particular satisfaction of a woman who has spent 22 years learning something carefully, and is now watching it demonstrate itself at the scale the learning always suggested it was capable of. Word was still moving through Fenwick County. It had not stopped since the morning Bertram Cole sat on his horse at the fence line and looked at 61 eggs in a crate beside a coop full of birds he had written off in October. The winter broke in the first week of March. Not dramatically, it released the way sustained cold releases, in degrees rather than all at once, the temperature climbing with the grudging patience of a thing that has been holding its position for a long time and is now conceding it one day at a time. The creek at the bottom of the Fen East pasture ran again on the 8th. The ice on the water trough thinned from 3 inches to 1 to a skin to nothing by the second week. Rosalind's flock had produced through all of it. Not at the summer rate. Winter was winter, and the biology of laying did not pretend otherwise. But consistently, in the range of 70 to 85 eggs daily through the weeks of sustained cold that had reduced every other significant poultry operation in the county to a fraction of normal production. The 117 hens in the insulated coop on Rosalind Fenne's holding had continued to do what hens do when they are given what they need to do it. Bertram Cole came to her door in March. Not in the way of a man who has come to concede something, in the way of a man who has spent 2 months watching an outcome he did not expect, and has arrived at the point where the most useful thing he can do is understand how it was produced. He came with the practical directness of a person who has a large poultry operation that produced 19 eggs on the 14th of January, and who would prefer not to repeat that performance in the following winter. She showed him the research letters, the 3 issues of the Agricultural Journal with the sections marked, the notes she had made in the margins across the 2 winters of reading before she acted on what she had read. She showed him the ledger, the weight records, the temperature logs, the daily production figures from the first egg on November 23rd through the February closing entries. She showed him the coop construction, the double north wall, the cattail cavity insulation, the canvas door baffle, the thermometer mounted at mid-height. She showed him the feed proportions, the fish meal ratio, the oyster shell quantity, the dried green supplement, the twice-daily feeding schedule, and the specific hours she had found most effective across 3 years of her existing flock before the Caldwell birds arrived. He wrote it all down. She was not a withholding woman. The knowledge had not become more valuable by being kept private. It had demonstrated its value by being applied, and demonstrated knowledge invites replication, and replication across a county's poultry operations was better for the county than a single operation's advantage in a hard winter. She noticed most things. She had noticed, in a sale bill in October, a notation about reduced body condition in a heritage flock, and had read it differently from every other buyer at the Caldwell sale, as a description of a circumstance rather than a verdict on a capacity. She had noticed, in 3 years of Agricultural Journal letters, the research on coop insulation and feed protein and winter laying rates, and had been building toward the application of that research before the specific occasion presented itself. She had noticed, in the feathering and comb color of the Caldwell birds through November, the specific signs of recovery that told her the experiment was working before the first egg confirmed it. She had not been lucky. The cold had been equally severe for everyone it touched. What had not been equal was what the cold found when it arrived at the Fenne holding: insulated walls, a managed feed program, 117 hens that had been restored to their own capacity by 8 weeks of the management they had always deserved, producing with the full expression of the genetics that Gerald Caldwell had selected, and then inadequately maintained, and that Rosalind Fenne had purchased for $12.40 at the end of a cold October afternoon. She was, for the first time in the 22 years she had kept poultry on this land, exactly where she had meant to be. Not finished. The spring would bring new birds, and the feed program required adjustment as the season changed, and the trading post orders needed to be maintained, and Bertram Cole's operation needed the spring to implement what she had shown him, and there was a county worth of poultry management that could be better than it had been if the knowledge kept moving. The knowledge was moving. It had the specific velocity of information confirmed by a winter that had tested every poultry operation in Fenwick County, and had delivered its verdict with the impersonal thoroughness that only a sustained and severe cold can deliver. 83 eggs on the 14th of January. From 117 hens that nobody at the Caldwell sale had thought worth bidding on. That was the verdict. It was, all things considered, sufficient.